Welcome everyone, this is Honda's Restart, and today we're going to be talking about when we can maybe see the next glimpse or teaser for the sequel to Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. So today is the release day for Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, and I'm playing the game, I'm very excited about it, but I've only just started it now. Sure, I played the demo, but even with that, there's still so much more to play, there's so much more context to the story, and glimpses and teasers and things to figure out and play through. It's going to take a little while before I can make a video specifically on Age of Calamity. But Age of Calamity is giving us that Breath of the Wild fix, but it isn't Breath of the Wild 2. So then, for today, we're going to be talking about when we can maybe see Breath of the Wild 2 again. The last time we saw anything new and official from Nintendo was the initial gameplay reveal trailer back at E3 2019. It's been a while, it's been basically a year and a half. How much longer are we going to have to wait before we get more new details on this game? Well, that's what we're talking about today. Now before we jump into things, let me quickly talk about my social media. There's a Twitter page, a Discord community, a Patron page, and a Twitch channel. If you are interested in any of that, check it all out. It's linked in the description below. And of course, if you like what you're seeing here, subscribe. So as I said earlier, it's too early into my playthrough for Age of Calamity before I can say with any certainty if there's some sort of tease or hint towards Breath of the Wild 2 in there. So you're gonna have to wait a little bit longer for that. At some point there will be some sort of video for that. But what I'm really sort of hoping for is to get some sort of hint for Breath of the Wild 2. I'm really waiting for when we get that kind of information. I'm sure a lot of you guys are as well, hence why you probably clicked on the video. And when we got the announcement for Age of Calamity, Eiji Aonuma, the Zelda director, told us that we'd have to wait a little bit longer for more news on the sequel to Breath of the Wild. Age of Calamity is giving us a whole bunch of Breath of the Wild goodness with all the cutscenes and such, giving us that story for the prequel, but the game is now out. At what point will Nintendo start talking about Breath of the Wild 2? The speculation is, by most people, is that the game is coming out sometime next year. Some have hoped for it to come sooner in the year, but based off the way things are going, I would think it's probably more likely closer to the holiday release. The reason I'm saying that is because, well, one, we still don't know that much about the game, and it's already November of 2020. If the game was, say, coming out, for example, March 2021, I feel like Nintendo would have started talking about it already. But another thing we should take into consideration here is the Zelda anniversary. That's February 21st. It's coming up, the 35th anniversary. Nintendo definitely has celebrated Mario's 35th anniversary, and what's interesting about that is that we saw trademarks for merchandising and such for Mario, and we've seen similar things for Zelda. The implication being that Zelda will have some sort of similar level of celebrations for its anniversary. There'll be some merchandising, maybe a few game releases, and we're bound to get some sort of announcement about those sometime soon if they actually have plans for that. Point is, we may get an announcement for that sometime soon, but I feel like it's already too far into the year, or too close to that March period, that February period, to get an announcement for Breath of the Wild 2 release date. I feel like we would have heard something already. This is a really big deal, a really big game. At this point, I'm thinking it's coming out a little bit later. But like many others, I'm still optimistic it's coming out in 2021. It's not confirmed for 2021, but it feels like a pretty safe bet. Initially, when we first saw the game, Breath of the Wild 2, when it was shown off at E3 2019, I was actually predicting that it would come out for this holiday. Sure, I was wrong, and when I made that prediction, I did acknowledge that because it's the Zelda team, they're always extending that release date because they're always figuring out different things they can do with their development and making the game better. So, you know, I definitely had that in mind, so I wasn't like 100% set in stone thinking that the game would come out this year, and sure enough it's not, but I thought it was at least possible because when we saw that trailer back at E3 2019, it was looking to be some sort of in-game, in-engine trailer. It was a story trailer. Stories done late into development for Zelda games. We know they started development for this Zelda game back in 2017, not to mention it's using Breath of the Wild as a foundation, that physics engine, that graphics engine, and such. So all of those different things should suggest the game is very far into development and perhaps not too far off. But if this is a big, major, new game with lots of new things to it, it's still going to take a while. And if anything, the fact that it hasn't come out yet, I think bodes well for how much content this game is going to have. It looks like the Zelda team is definitely doing everything in their power to make this an amazing game and a worthy successor to Breath of the Wild. And that's exciting, but it also may mean that we won't just get the game at any random point. It's going to come out at a time when it's ready. But I do think it being ready would be sometime next year. Like I said, I thought it was possible for it to come out this year, but it isn't. And maybe the pandemic has delayed things a little bit. So even if it was maybe coming out for March 2021, if you factor in the pandemic, that surely has slowed down things to some extent. But at some point in 2021, I do think Breath of the Wild 2 is coming out. So if Breath of the Wild 2 is really coming out at some point in 2021, they're going to have to start talking about it fairly soon, because this is a really big deal. This is a sequel to a game that has sold over 19 million. If you count for Wii U sales, Breath of the Wild is probably over 20 million copies sold. This is a huge, huge game, and the follow-up may not sell as well, but could potentially sell about 10 million copies or more. It has a lot of sales potential here, so definitely Nintendo is going to want to market this heavily. It's going to be one of the biggest games to come out in 2021. Which brings us to the whole point of this video. When is the next time we're going to actually see some actual real information and gameplay and details about this game? I gotta think it's fairly soon, because they're probably going to be hyping this game up, marketing it throughout the year, because it's one of the biggest games for Nintendo in 2021, it seems. Well, I have a prediction, and it's not a very specific prediction, but I feel like it's one I'm confident in putting out there. This game will be readdressed or shown off to us, the fans, the consumers, sometime between December 10th, which is Game Awards 2020, and February 21st, 2021, which is Zelda's 35th anniversary. Somewhere in that window, I believe we will see Breath of the Wild 2 again. When is that going to be? Well, the Game Awards I feel like is the next big bet for that to happen. Historically speaking, Breath of the Wild, or the Zelda series as a whole, has been shown off at the Game Awards. Sure, last year for Game Awards 2019, there wasn't that much shown off by Nintendo, but if you look at what we got for this year, 2020, there wasn't really too much to show off. But going into 2021, the speculation is that it's going to be one of the biggest years for the Nintendo Switch. So with that in mind, Nintendo will have some things to show off, potentially some really big announcements. One of them could be Breath of the Wild 2. Considering that the Game Awards is basically 3 weeks after the release for Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, I would say it's about enough time afterwards to start talking about the next big Zelda game. They're going to give Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity some time to have the spotlight in terms of marketing and such, but even when they show off Breath of the Wild 2, what's going to happen is that fans are going to be very curious. They're going to want to learn more about the Breath of the Wild series and lore, so they're going to go back and either buy or play Breath of the Wild 1, and also the prequel in terms of story, Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. So no matter how you spin it, it's definitely going to be good marketing for both Koei Tecmo and Nintendo to talk about Breath of the Wild 2 during the Game Awards. It's going to have a huge audience, and I think considering that the next generation systems are now coming out, and they're going to be going into full swing with next year, and there'll likely be some big reveals from both Sony and Microsoft during the Game Awards, Nintendo's probably going to want to come out swinging, and one great way to do it, or perhaps the best way to do it, would be to show us more for Breath of the Wild 2. So I do feel like it's a pretty decent bet to say that Breath of the Wild 2 would be one of the big things to show off at the Game Awards. I think there's a decent chance that could be happening. But at the same time, it's entirely possible Nintendo may want to wait a little bit. As I said earlier, Zelda's 35th anniversary is approaching. Perhaps Nintendo wants to have some sort of Nintendo Direct that's focused on mostly Zelda with a few other little things, or an entirely Zelda 35th anniversary focused Nintendo Direct where they talk about a whole bunch of different things Zelda. Perhaps they talk about some virtual console releases, some merchandising things, perhaps a Skyward Sword HD or some sort of Zelda collection, and the big one being Breath of the Wild 2. I think that's a likelihood. In fact, I'll say that regardless of what happens at the Game Awards, we're going to see Breath of the Wild 2 by the Zelda anniversary. I feel like that's a fairly safe bet. Nintendo is bound to talk about Zelda to some extent by that anniversary time. I'm not saying something Zelda will come out in 2021 by the anniversary time, but I think they're at least going to talk about it. So say hypothetically speaking, Nintendo has some sort of Zelda collection or a Skyward Sword HD due to come out in the first half of 2021. Maybe it comes out in March, April, May, June, hard to say, but I think there's a chance something like that comes out around that time. If that's the case, I could see them announcing it in February for the Zelda 35th anniversary, and if Nintendo's going to go ahead and do that, have some sort of presentation for that, I feel like it would be really, really weird for Nintendo to not mention Breath of the Wild 2 if it's coming out at some point in 2021. So to go back to my point about the Game Awards, I feel like there's a decent bet we could see an announcement at the Game Awards, but because of the Zelda 35th anniversary, they may save that Zelda announcement for the Anniversary Direct. But at the same time, they could just show it to us at both times. They could have some sort of teaser trailer confirming a holiday or at least 2021 release for Breath of the Wild 2. Then we could get an extended look at the game around a Nintendo Direct, be it either January or February, that will talk about Zelda's 35th anniversary, and it will include a few other things like a Skyward Sword HD maybe. And that's how Nintendo could go about doing things. They're going to talk about Breath of the Wild 2 multiple times throughout the year. It's one of their biggest games, if not their biggest game for 2021. So it's definitely going to get addressed multiple times. Not to mention, going into 2021, the hope is that things will start going back to a norm in terms of marketing and merchandising and such. So we may start to see Nintendo start showing off normal, regular Nintendo Directs, not announcing something a month in advance. They might start announcing it a few months in advance. And if that's really the case, I feel like it does make more sense to think that Nintendo's going to be showing off Breath of the Wild 2 multiple times throughout the year. Of course, we should address the other potential side of this argument here, where Nintendo may not go back to normal, and 2021 may have similar marketing to the way things were handled this year, where things were announced a month or two in advance, and that was it. That is possible, but I feel like if Nintendo's going to talk about Zelda's 35th anniversary plans, they will still address Breath of the Wild 2 at that point. On top of that, if you look at the games that were talked about throughout this year, none of them are really big, brand new, original Nintendo products. We had 3D All-Stars, which is a compilation of old Mario games, Pikmin 3 Deluxe, a game that is a Wii U remaster basically, and it's just Pikmin. It's not a big 3D Mario or a big 3D Zelda, so the scope there is a little bit lesser. Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, I would say, is the biggest game to come out before all of the pandemic things came about and started slowing things down, and that game is being made by Koei Tecmo. It's a spin-off Zelda game that's being made by a third-party publisher and developer. So all those games are a little bit different compared to a Super Mario Odyssey 2 or a Breath of the Wild 2. Big games like that, Nintendo's going to want to talk about in advance, or at least traditionally, that's how they like to handle it. So in my opinion, I feel like it's a pretty safe bet to say that at the earliest, we will see Breath of the Wild 2 at the Game Awards for 2020 on December 10th, or as late as Zelda's 35th anniversary, which is February 21st, 2021. And I'll actually say I'm leaning more towards it happening at the Game Awards, because the last time we saw Breath of the Wild 2 was E3 2019. How much longer is Nintendo going to go without showing off this game? Are they really going to go a whole entire year, the entirety of 2020, without showing off the sequel to Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, which is likely going to be Nintendo's biggest game for 2021? I'm thinking more likely that we will see it, and the Game Awards, I think, is our best bet. But if for whatever reason we don't, I still think at some point by the Zelda 35th anniversary, Nintendo will show it off again. But what do you guys think? Do you guys think the next time we can see Breath of the Wild 2 is at the Game Awards, or will we have to wait a little bit longer? Let me know in the comments below. Anyways, everyone, this is On This Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.